what happens when you have a completely divided society that has two totally different ideas of freedom? And by golly, they will do everything in their power to implement said idea of freedom. I'll tell you, not only the unexpected outcome of poor old Charlie in the chocolate factory being a casualty in all this, okay? All we wanted was a golden ticket. And all we're getting, okay, is the golden ticket express pathway to a shit show that is our culture, right? A culture in which freedom actually equals censorship. Think about that. We are in such a politicized, upside down time. Again, both sides digging their heels in and having such a convicted notion of what freedom is to them and wanting to push it on everyone else that it's literally equating to and actualizing as censorship. Riddle me that, people. Bring back Charlie, bring back the Oompa Loompas who are no longer short men. They're little men, they're little people, okay? Get it right, get it tight, okay? Resurrect Charlie and or Willie W to answer this for us, okay? We are going to get into this said shit show today. And because it is so convoluted, I'm just going to preface all of this by saying basically nothing I'm about to lay out is going to make sense, okay? Which encapsulates the nature of this all. Nothing does make sense, but you know what? We're going to give it a go. We're going to try our darndest, okay, to try and make it make sense as such. So how did this all begin? How did this journey start? It started on a little place far, far away. You may heard of called Twitter Spaces, with none other than Ronnie D down in the Sunshine State with Elon Musk on Twitter announcing his presidential candidacy for 2024. So as Ronnie D does, Ronnie D with who I don't think gives off the energy that is the big D, like I used to, but now like he so jerks off and makes everything about the culture war. It's a little played. It's like, bro, and that's coming from me. Okay, I cancel me, baby. It's a little bit like, we get it. We had it. But you know what? We're not gonna know. We may never know about the big D of Ronnie D or lack thereof, because pornography in Florida, that shit, I mean, hold on, get your Pornhub screenshots while you can down there, people, because you ain't gonna find it there pretty soon. You ain't gonna find any documentation of Ronnie D down there if things keep going and rolling how they are. So he's on Twitter Spaces announcing his candidacy, right? And getting into the culture wars and getting into this big conversation and this big controversy right now regarding book burning in Florida and in Florida schools. And he says, this whole thing is actually a hoax. There's no book burning. You can buy any book that you want in the state of Florida, and proceeds to talk about the bills and the laws that he has signed, which I'm going to get into is really more about school transparency and putting power back into the hands of parents. So even Elon Musk, okay, the voice of the people, he even says to Ronnie D, he's like, oh, like, you're not banning books. Okay, that's not what I believe. That's not what the mainstream media led me to believe. And even me, I'm not one to easily be misled, as you know. And I'm thinking the same thing as Elon. I'm like, oh shit, really? Because that's not what I was led to believe. Again, I was thinking that there was some serious book burning going on down in that bitch. So I decided to do a little digging into this. And I know you guys, I had gotten some responses. I posted to my Twitter, or sorry, my Freudian slip. Elon Musk is everywhere. He will never rest. To my Instagram story about the book burning. And some of you responded being like, can you actually discern this for us? Because how much of it is the mainstream media blowing things out of proportion? How much of it is real? What's a myth? What's a hoax? Like, help us out. So like I said, I took it into my own hands because it is the era of trust no bitch. And I looked into things, and I'm going to simplify it for you because number one, the actual bills themselves, it's all, again, very convoluted. They're hard to find. The way the mainstream extrapolates things, exaggerates things, makes it all very confusing. But basically all you need to know is From what I gathered, there are three big bills that have been signed in Florida over the last year, right? By Ron D, by RD. One is a parental rights bill known as Don't Say Gay. And this bill is all about prohibiting gender and sexual ideology in public schools in Florida, K through third grade. And I'm going to dive into this a little more, but again, this is where everyone has their agenda. And to me, things just go too far on both sides. Like, again, do I agree? Do 7-year-olds need to be learning the Kama Sutra? Okay. I don't think so. Not today. Also, do they need to be learning? You may not actually be a boy. You may not actually be a girl. You could be a unicorn. You could be a leaf. You could be a crayon if you want. You could eat this crayon. Like, I don't agree with that. No. However, now it's gone too far to where people are walking on eggshells being like, okay, so it's so ambiguous that it's like, well, what does this mean now? What if a student has gay parents and they're brought up in the classroom? There's an actual example of a Disney movie that was played that's now getting scrutinized. The teacher's under investigation. Like, it all just becomes very messy. Even the Target thing, like, now they're going so hard to where it's like, it's not even about kids anymore, but it's like, this whole uproar about the Target Pride display. And it's like, yes, I saw it down here in Nashville. And my reaction was like, I rolled my eyes. I kept it moving. I went to the protein section to proceed with Operation Sex Goddess Body and kept my day moving. Again, do I need to see tucking swimwear? Do we need to see, kids, little baby shirts with gender ideology and sexuality and all this on it? No, when at the end of the day, I bet you most gay people are like, I'm not even buying this shit. I don't need a rainbow mug today to be proud of my gayness. Like, I don't need this part. I don't need to partake in this part of consumerism, right? But they've gone so far now of like, this displays at all. Pride displays can't be in Target. And look, I even saw a conservative commentator. They posted a meme and a video of people looting a Target and the Pride section is still full. And they're like, see, even looters don't want the Pride stuff. It's like, all right, chill. Like, so little side tangent, but again, how all of this, it starts as one thing, but they have an agenda and it goes too far, which is why, unlike the bills that are being passed, I ain't giving Ronnie D a pass, right? So we have the parental rights. Then we have transparency. This is where the book burning comes into play, transparency in schools. So basically he made it because of indoctrination. And again, a lot of it I do agree is not okay, right? That's being pushed in schools, and ideology, making the curriculum and books more transparent, and what he calls putting power back into the hands of parents. So putting the curriculum, books, what are in libraries out there for public review. But on the other end of it, again, with things being a slippery slope and going a little too far, is that a parent, a guardian, anyone really can put into question or object a book being available in these public school libraries for kids. Now, once they are put into question, once they're challenged, they're then reviewed by God knows who. Like, maybe it's a board of Oompa Loompas, little people, little theys, thems. I don't know. We may never know, right? It's the same people who actually has the explicit dick pics of Ronnie D to be used as blackmail, remains to be seen, right? But so say a book is deemed inappropriate. Now they can say things like inappropriate based on, a lot of it is what he's saying is inappropriate for grade schoolers, pornographic, sexual, some of it is race. We're going to get to all that in CRT in a little bit. But some of it is actually like not okay. Like, one of them is a book about an asexual who's non-binary. Some is like sex acts. Apparently they were showing in a council meeting, they're showing one of these books that were in a kid's library with pornographic, like masturbation and sex acts, that the local news channel literally cut the feed. So it's like, if this shit ain't appropriate for local news channel 5, I don't know how it's appropriate for Molly in the 2nd grade, right? But if a book is deemed inappropriate and pulled, that has to be made public knowledge what the book is and why it was pulled, right? But again, that to me is a very slippery slope. It's like a game of whack-a-mole, because it's like, okay, any Tom, Dick, and Harry could be like, excuse me, I have a problem with this book, right? Because I don't like the characters' overalls in that. But like, it's like, okay, how many times? That's what makes it insane. It's like, how many times can you go down this path so everybody has a say? That to me, oddly enough, is the antithesis of freedom, right? Because it's like, okay, everyone's going to find something problematic. So because of that, we're just going to take it away and censor it. Like, bad, 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 slippery slope. We don't want that to happen. And another bill is around wokeism in the corporate world, right? Woke ideology in the corporate world in Florida and in businesses, and also banning CRT in public schools, critical race theory. However, he has his own kind of version of what he's done in that regard. So those are the kind of main buckets. And like I said, my big problem with this, again, is that this guy doesn't get a pass. And it's the hypocrisy of it all, right? Because I understand that, number one, he and other conservatives like him are doing this in the name of protecting kids and freedom against what has been such a tight grip of woke ideology, and walking on eggshells and getting reprimanded and punished for speaking up for a tweet from 70 BC before Twitter was a thing, whatever it is. So it's kind of the backlash to that, but in turn, it's its very own form of censorship, as we've seen. And like I said, all of it is a very slippery slope, right? Because not only can you have anyone, like I said, chime in and be like, I don't like this, and here's why, and then it's ripped from shelves, or from libraries, that's not okay. But also the underpinnings of it, which is like, how far does this go, and the ambiguity of like, what are you really saying? Like, again, something that starts as the seed of, it's not appropriate to be teaching second graders about heteronormative standards in society and all this, and what their gender is, and who they could have sex acts with when they're 7, and masturbation and all this. But as it pertains to the slippery slope, some examples for you, right? Where again, it's like, you guys are hiding something else. It's going too far. Again, like, why are you on this crusade to get the pride displays in Target ripped from the stores, pushed to the back of the stores, when you should be about freedom and inclusion, right? One example is Amanda Gorman. She's a Black poet, and she's written pieces that have been read, like, one at Biden's inauguration. So an example is, in a Florida public school, her poem was available in a library, and a parent spoke up that it was problematic, saying that, because a lot of them will argue that there are underpinnings of, we're going to get to this with the CRT stuff, but like the oppressor and the oppressed in society, and tensions and inciting violence and hatred and all this, right? And I read the passages that the lady was talking about, and I'm like, this is a stretch. Like, this is a stretch. Like, a Calabasas mom at her Thursday morning Pilates, like, she has never seen a stretch. So, but this is where the mainstream blows things out of proportion, because they've made it this big story. They're like, this Amanda Gorman poem is now banned and all this. And she's spoken up, being like, I wasn't trying to push any sort of political agenda, but kids should be able to use their imagination and read and write all kinds of things, and have access to a plethora of in the literary world, right? But when you actually get into the nitty gritty, what happened was, it was a K-8 school, and it was made available in this section for 6th grade and above, right? For middle schoolers, essentially. So again, is it problematic? Yes. But again, where you have to be careful, because the mainstream will blow everything out of proportion. Again, like the political theater, when all of this was going down and showing pictures of like empty library shelves in schools, where it's like, where's the lie? Like, it ain't happening. It could happen in my 8th grade production of Grease, all the theater, the theater of it all, but not on MSNBC. Get your life right. So another slippery slope example, though, of this is a 5th grade teacher in a Florida school who showed the Disney movie called Strange World, that is not even about sex or gender, but has a gay character at the forefront. But moreover, the film is about planet Earth and nature. And that's what this lady was doing. Like, she was up in this nature class and, you know, geography. Let's hear it for the big G. And showed this movie to her fifth graders to really give them a, you know, a cool different view of that, right? And someone called, this is what I mean. This is where it's like a different version of the 1984. Someone called it into question because there's a gay character. And this is where it's absurd. It's like, are you guys joking? That's where I'm like, okay, fifth graders, they can and should be exposed to a gay character in a Disney movie. Like, give me a goddamn break. That's on the other end of it. It's like, it is 2023. Don't be another version of the thought police. It's like, seriously, if you're all about freedom and inclusion, then actually do that. Now, there's a line, again, where it is inappropriate and it is indoctrination, but a effing Disney movie with about Earth with a gay character, actually get a life, right? So this is where it's concerning. And this is where I ain't given any excuses to these people. Now, really quickly on the CRT note, right? This is what's really interesting because both sides have versions of the same thing. So Ron DeSantis essentially in public schools banned CRT. And he says that this is be critical race theory, in which I'm going to give you guys a disclaimer. This is not my wheelhouse, and I'm not the uber intellectual when it comes to CRT to dive into this, really, to really sink your teeth into this concept and get into the nuance of it. I recommend people like Barry Weiss, like Andrew Sullivan, even Nico House, a friend of mine who's been on the show, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a bit. But with that being said, right, just at the base of it, the whole idea is that everything is viewed through a society in which there are the oppressors and the oppressed. You are not inherently racist or sexist based on race or sex or color. We aren't going to be playing this. And they've literally have gone so far with CRT to say things like math is racist, science is racist, language is racist. I mean, my view of it all is that it's absolutely ridiculous. While I can, of course, acknowledge that this country has a very long-rooted, complicated history with racism, sexism, all of these things, viewing everything through this lens, as in a CRT, I find completely debilitating and destructive. Even as a woman, right? To place that on women, to place the self-imposed, self-inflicted box or feeling that you are less than, you are oppressed, you are at the mercy of men or the patriarchy is incredibly disempowering. And do you think that I want that being taught to little boys and little girls in schools? I've talked about it with my friend Nico House, him as a Black man, me as a woman, and the idea that each of us, respectively and individually, aren't going to base our entire identities on those things and the victimhood of those things versus true meritocracy to make everyone free of these preconceived notions and frankly give everybody a fighting chance. Now, with all of this being said, back to Ronnie D, right? As if he's a character out of Jersey Shore. To his credit, there are some things that he has done. I didn't see this until I actually read the fine print of like what the bills are about. He actually did add on to curriculum and implementing requirements in public schools pertaining to Civil War, Jim Crow, the ramifications of racism and prejudice and all this, but in a fact-based way. However, this is where the nature of this lends all of this to yet again another very slippery slope. Because if you're saying we can only teach about Black history and the Holocaust and slavery and all of these things in a fact-based way, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that personal accounts aren't acceptable and we can't learn about history through that lens? I mean, I'll never forget, I was in high school and we had a Holocaust survivor come to the school and tell his story. And to this day, it has never left me. It was one of the most striking accounts I'd ever heard. So by that logic, would that not be acceptable? We can't cherry pick and simply choose out of thin air what's okay to some people and not okay to other people. If some people take issue with certain stories, and then next thing you know, plucking it out one by one, they're getting pulled from curriculum from schools. Well, what will be left? And in that lens, I can see that as erasing history and not teaching history accurately, or not looking at the hard truths, even if that makes us uncomfortable. So that's why we have to be careful with going so hard against something like CRT, sterilizing everything and going so far the other way. But of course, I absolutely don't think something like CRT is the answer. And that's why before we kind of tap out of this, I do have to shout out the people who aren't even conservative and are in his boat when it comes to this, right? Like, I mentioned my friend Nico House, who's a Black progressive and thinks that all of this is really nonsense. Take a look at his page and his content. My favorite, perhaps, is Barry Weiss, right? Who is definitely not a conservative, more of a moderate, is a lesbian Jew, okay? And basically, her whole thing is, okay, what happens when you're teaching? This is like a white supremacist dream. What happens when you're teaching little white boys that they're inherently it's more superior than to little Black boys? Or you're teaching little Black kids that they're inherently oppressed, right? And little white kids that they're inherently the oppressors. Like, they grow up and then what? It's just toxic. It just causes for, an anxious, angry, bitter society. And an example of that. So I was in LA recently. I know I stepped my little toe back into Woketopia, and boy, oh boy, did I get my dose of wokeism on cue. So I went to see Margaret Cho, right? Famous Asian female comedian at Largo in LA. It was just this angry, bitter rant as a feminist, as a gay woman, as a pro-choice woman. And unfortunately, this is what happens in this climate. Margaret Cho is notably a very funny comic. But because, like many others, this woke poltergeist has possessed her being and the exorcist has yet to get a hold of her, it monopolizes everything and it makes comedy not even humorous or funny anymore. It just sucks the fun out of everything, which is also very sad because, as I've said many times, comedy is the way to shine a light onto society and to help us navigate these times. And it's like that, I feel like, is the product of pushing this notion that we are constantly in this hierarchy of clawing to the top and being oppressed. And this is what in turn happens. I'm watching all this, right? And I'm interested to see how liberals, mainstream left, woke, if you will, are reacting and where they're at in this conversation, right? And what's going on and their thoughts on all of it, and censoring free speech in their own way. So here's an example now, though, on the other side of it, right? Just a couple examples. So I saw a story of a teenage high school girl, and she was talking about how she did a paper on, I believe it was on trans people participating in sports. And she shows the paper and she shows the notes, and she continuously gets flunked time after time because of using the term biological women. And the note that the teacher writes, she's literally like, I like this concept of this paper. However, biological woman just perpetuates heteronormative standards in society. I mean, seriously? This paper wasn't even anti-trans, so much so that the teacher acknowledged this is a progressive concept. I like this idea, but because she used the term biological women, she flunks. Perhaps the thought police's finest work, if you ask me. I actually read an op-ed by a trans children's book, a picture book, if you will, author in USA Today, trans man. And they basically say, we're getting away from what this is about. I keep being asked to talk about this, and they're like, I just want this to be about the craft and the story and the visuals and things like The Giving Tree, like all these iconic kids books, right? And the works that I'm doing and all these things, not the culture war of what's censored and what's not, right? But they're like, with that being said, we have to talk about this egregious, attack on free speech by the right because of this, right? Like being on the receiving end of it. Like we can't just sit by and let nothing happen. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, let's have a meditative moment. Do you people not realize how much you perpetuate this very thing in your own way? A Burbank school in California that, because of the themes of race and how they're portrayed, banned in the schools classics like Of Mice and Men, To Kill a Mockingbird, Huckleberry Finn. And we're seeing it happen all the time, even in movies, right? In movies now, they put disclaimers like before Gone with the Wind, as if we don't know or can't tell people around us or kids or whoever it is. It's like, this is, racially insensitive for the time and depicts what actually was factual at that time. It's like, right. So let it be that. How on God's green earth are we going to be educated and learn and move forward if we're censoring and tiptoeing and changing everything based off of people's feelings and based off of today? How does that make sense? This is not how history works. So let's preserve it and learn it and look at it and move on for it and understand what a mind-blowing concept that it is in the context of that period and that time in history, and move on, right? Instead of removing them all together because it's insensitive for the times now. Are you serious? Earlier, I brought up good old Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Roald Dahl. And I bring this up because perhaps what's worse, see, this is where the other side of it is, a perpetrator of what they claim to be a victim of. And perhaps, I don't even know which is worse. It's all bad. It's all around bad, right? But I would argue that one step worse than censoring it is changing it. Like, mark my words on this day. If any AI woke, unhinged robot college professor at some liberal arts fancy private college goes back and changes my words in any Cancel Me Baby episode, they will be hearing from me. They will be seeing me. I will be the Scrooge, the Taylor ghost of Christmas and every day of their lives past to haunt their ass. Okay? Because it's what I just said before. Even with my own show, do I agree with things I said a year ago, 6 months ago, even a week ago? Maybe not. But don't you dare go back and change it. Can you imagine these people rolling in their grave? I'm talking to you, Roald Dahl. That's exactly what they did. There have literally been revised versions of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, of classic children's books like James and the Giant Peach, to change, like I said, Oompa Loompas of little men to little people, right? Removing words like ugly, changing fat to enormous. It's like, if you can't buck up and roll with the dictionary, you're a lost. I'm all for growth here. I Cancel Me Baby, but your ass is a lost cause, right? Another example of this is John Cleese, right? The Monty Python actor who recently said, because he wants to bring, Life of Brian to a theater show. Now, there's a scene in it that, again, in today's time wouldn't be deemed sensitive. A man who wants to be a woman, and he says things like, I want to have babies and don't you oppress me and all this. And it's supposed to be satire and funny. And now they want him to take out the scene in the theater production. And he's like, absolutely not. Let art be art. Are you fucking serious? We're going to go back now and change every little thing depending on what we feel comfortable with today. Okay, talk about slippery slope. Then we do that with paintings, with entertainment, with media, with history. Like, oh, what could possibly go wrong there? Mess. So all that goes to say, both sides do this, and both sides should be ashamed, but particularly the left, because it's like what Bill Maher always says. It's like, we were the ones against the man when the right was always trying to censor our shit. That's why it's like, take a look in the mirror. You should be ashamed, but not the mirror, mirror in Snow White, because pretty soon that shit will be canceled too. I don't know why. Maybe the evil witch was too light of a shade of white. I don't know. I don't know why they're going to cancel Snow White today, but all that goes to say, both sides obviously have their agendas. And on a more serious and concerning note, both sides have people on the other side scared to do or say anything. And it's so toxic and it's so destructive. And to all of you, I say, knock it off. So In my last portion of this, I have a little bit of a solution though. And that's voices that I believe we should be listening to help make sense of all this and to help actually bring us to reality. My gay, lesbian, Jew queen, Bari Weiss, who again, moderate, very prominent journalist, very pro common sense. And her Substack and her, which I'm obsessed with, and her platform is called The Free Press. But she often talks about, as a lesbian, she really addresses how convoluted and confusing this whole thing has become. The concept that your gender, your sex, your orientation can all be chosen, and there's no biological merit in any of it. In their view, it's all purely societal constructs, things made up by society, thus eradicating basically what it means to be gay and gayness altogether. Because in this radical view, if you're a biological woman attracted to other women, well, you could and should just become a man and boop, like magic, you're not a lesbian anymore. And it's funny because I actually overheard a conversation. This is like being in the wilderness, in the real life field of it all. I overheard over the weekend a conversation with two lesbians talking about this very thing. They talked about how, getting married as lesbians and having children and all of this stuff, and talking about how all of this doesn't do them any service because number one, they're like, okay, like, again, if all of this is just fluid and picked out of thin air, then why did we fight and come out and, own our identity as lesbians, right? But also they argued we just want to live our lives. We didn't force it on everybody else, like what we're seeing happening right now in terms of, trans and gender fluidity and all of this, right? So Bari Weiss is very much someone I recommend. Secondly, going off of that is my guy, Andrew Sullivan, who is more on the conservative side. He's gay. His Substack is The Weekly Dish. And I shared excerpts of this new essay that he has, and it's excellent. It's called The Queers versus the Homosexuals. And similar to critical race theory, he talks about queer theory. And in queer theory, because their whole view is anything against heteronormative or heterosexual standards is the oppressed going against the oppressors, right? But their whole thing is that there's no such thing as human nature. There's no such thing as, again, biological sex, hormones, or sexual preferences or orientations or all that. Nope. Instead, you can pick what you are and you can pick what gender you are and you can just pick who you're attracted to. In which case, Andrew Sullivan, again, similar to the Bari Weiss thing, is like, okay, so by that logic, again, why did I fight and have all this based on me being a male attracted to biological men? You're just erasing my entire identity and experience. But further, he makes a crazy parallel in the leftist queer theorists that I'm talking about, and also traditionally Christian conservatives, in that he says both of these groups, like what a turn of events, but both groups are telling gay men that they're not really men. Think about it. With queer theorists, it's like, nope, you can just choose. You choose whatever you are. It's all socially made up anyway. And with Christian conservatives, it's like, no, you're not really gay. You just think you can choose, right? You can choose to be gay. You can choose who you're attracted to. You're not really, you really, really do, and you have to and you should like vaginas, which is essentially what he's like. So both of them are telling me I'm not a man and that I have to like vaginas, basically. Because really, they're two sides of the same coin. Christian conservatives are going to try their darndest because in their view, they're going to try to hold on to heterosexuality and those heteronormative standards, right? So you're not a real man if you don't know that you are attracted to women. Again, it's a choice. So you're going to proactively choose to like women and vaginas. That's the way it should be. And that's the way that we see it. Now you have in reverse the queer theorists who are going, well, if you're a man, which is socially constructed anyway, and you like other men, well, you can just choose to be a woman and actually be a vagina, like them enough to have one. And then you're attracted to men. And that's what makes sense. It's like way to also push heteronormative standards. Ever think of that? The only way it makes sense to be attracted to the same sex is to become the opposite sex. Well, would you look at that? Both sides of it actually perpetuating the same thing in their own twisted way. And thus, undercutting a biological man being attracted to another man, or a biological woman being attracted to another woman. How crazy is that? So definitely recommend that. Another great example is Tim Scott, the Black South Carolina senator who is running to be president. He talks about how his family, and from one generation to the next, went from picking cotton to Congress, right? That's his history. Meanwhile, you have Joy Behar, a white lady on The View, who literally said, and I quote, that Tim Scott just doesn't get racism and that's why he's a conservative. It's like, push your insanity even more. He responds being like, what message does this send to Black kids and to young Black folks? It's like, if you think for yourself, if you go against the grain, if you refuse to believe that you're oppressed, you'll be told by a white lady, Joy Behar, that you don't get what racism is. Like, that to me is white supremacy, right? They're sitting with their cup of coffee at The View. Another example who I brought up before, right, is Caitlyn Jenner, of course, who is always torn down and defamed and all of this. And why? Is it because she sticks up for biological women in sports? Is it merely because she's a conservative? Meanwhile, she's probably the most like authoritative figure to speak on athleticism and being a trans woman in entertainment, in media, and pop culture. And she's torn down. I mean, there's something every week with her, right? The most recent is there was a star from Drag Race who literally tweeted and was like, I would happily have the take the chance at spitting in your face. Someone who I've talked about many of times, but is J.K. Rowling. Again, shouldn't we hear what she has to say about the journey and experience of a woman for women's rights, women's success, women's achievements? This is somebody who was in an abused relationship, was on food stamps, was a single mom, and manages to, again, pull off Harry Potter, the biggest literary, media phenomenon, right? That we'll probably see in our lifetime. But no, strays that all from the trans ideals, and is constantly stepped on even by the people that she made famous, like Daniel Radcliffe. Like, get an actual clue, do a spell on yourself and figure that out. But luckily we do have voices like some of the aforementioned breaking through that, again, we should listen to in times of confusion to cut through the noise. And we can acknowledge, again, we do have a really long rooted, complicated history with things like hate and discrimination and racism and bigotry. But with that being said, we have to also take that into consideration and look at how far we've come, where we're going, and move forward. And in that regard, I do feel like there's so much entitlement in this country, right? Whether it be trying to censor or shut someone up who isn't in line with you. Like, we have to be able to hear all of these voices, because clearly each side doesn't like it when they're on the receiving end of it, but they have no problem doing it to each other. And when I say entitlement, I mean, stop trying to step on each other's freedoms of speech. We are in the country of prosperity and of freedom. When you look at what's going on in the world right now and the atrocities, it really puts things into perspective. I mean, look at the sweeping anti-gay laws that Uganda just put into place, right? For being overtly gay, you could get the death penalty. For having gay sex, you could have life in prison. Even in Afghanistan, when women, first of all, not even allowed in education and workplaces, right? But have to be accompanied by men in public when they travel, or are raped openly and then killed because they were raped. These are the realities of women, of gay people. You want to talk about trans people in places like Uganda and Afghanistan? So I'm saying it puts all of these things into perspective. And I feel like over the weekend, we're on the heels of Memorial Day. It's funny because I had multiple conversations about and with immigrants, right? And why they came here. A friend of mine who both of her parents Mexican, immigrated here, right, for a better life, all hard workers. And my mom, Italian immigrant, same thing. Like, I've never seen someone work harder. I like to think, like, got to brush the little shoulders off. I get it from her, the work ethic, but like self-made, you know, came here in, you know, prosperity and to build something for yourself and to be in a place of freedom, right? It's funny, I had an Uber driver and he talks about how he has 4 sons between the ages of 12 and 15 and how just 3 years ago they immigrated here legally from Albania. And he talked about this very thing in the entitlement. And I said, "Do you miss home?" And he's like, "I miss it, but I would never regret it and I would never change it because my sons have a better chance at a better future here." So all of this just really struck me. And when I look at all of this on the whole, I know that navigating it right now is very confusing. But if there's one thing that I know and that I'll fight for, is that freedom is one thing that should not be.